Okay, I think we will get started. I can see a lot of you still coming in the room as we speak, but we will get started on introductions, at least while other participants start to come in. So hello everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. You just joined SheCanCode's live webinar called How to Build Your Personal Brand. I am your host for today, Katie Batesman, the Content Director at SheCanCode. For those tuning in who aren't familiar with us, SheCanCode is a collaborative community working together to tackle the tech gender gap. You can join our community platform to find a supportive network of like-minded individuals, new opportunities, and guidance to help you to excel in your tech career. Now, before I introduce our speakers, please note that we have a live Q&A session running throughout the webinar today. Please submit your questions throughout and we'll try and get to them at the end. You can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom. The chat box does not work, so please put your questions in the Q&A box for us. So let's kick off with my wonderful guests for today. I have Danielle Gower, Head of Recruitment UK Expleo. I have Kate Hawthorn, Director of Consultant Talent, FDM Group, and I have Cat Wildman, founder of poweredbydiversity.org. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you. We're going to start with some introductions, if that's okay, ladies. Danielle, can we start with you? A little bit about you and where you work. Did you fall into tech? A little bit about you.
Yep, sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Danielle Gower and I look after the recruitment for Expleo. We have a big tech division and being totally honest, I don't come from a technology background, but funnily enough, you quickly find your feet and nothing like being thrown in the deep end. I have a passion for bringing more females into the technology industry. I am a mother of 2 daughters, so it's very key to my heart, and I look forward to speaking to you all today.
Lovely. And like a lot of our community, Danielle, you are all in the same boat, not from a technical background. And we love to hear that when ladies say that and how they end up in the tech sector. Kate, yourself.
Hi, everyone. I can add to that. I'm also not from a tech background. There's going to be a theme, isn't there? Yeah. I'm Director of Consultant Talent at FDM Group. And I oversee, lots of different projects, particularly around our apprenticeship programme and our alumni community. And I also have a contribution to our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. I've been with the business for 10 years and had a career change. Used to work in the university sector and then got really interested in the way that technology careers were changing. And I just wanted to be a part of it. So I joined the business. And if you don't know who FDM is, we're a global consultancy. We power the people behind tech and innovation. It's the easiest way to kind of think of us, really. And I guess one of the really important things is we really do believe that talent exists everywhere within all communities, and that, you know, access to opportunities and where you end up in life should be based on your ability and what you want to do, not on where you came from. So FDM is a really great fit for me because that's what I'm really passionate about as well. So yeah, thanks for having me today. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us, and lovely to hear that not from a technical background, and recently, it was actually last year, FDM graciously hosted us for one of our hackathons, and that was for returners and training people up who also, you know, didn't have a background in tech, and finding a way to find a way forward for them. And I remember that hackathon; it was super fun.
It was great
fun. It was full of returners and people wanting to transition into tech for the first time. So yeah, we absolutely loved that and loved coming down to FDM. Kat, last but not least, welcome to the panel.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. So I was a scientist. I did a science degree and then I went straight into tech at the age of 22 or whatever it was. And I worked in tech for about 18 years and was very involved in the women in tech, women in STEM areas. I was a chief product officer. So I was in tech in the product and delivery side. Can't code. And I'm sad about it, but I'm very, very much a believer that you can very much be a part of tech without being able to, you know, engineer things and actually code. There's so many different roles. So I'm a massive passionate person about get into tech, because there's a job for everyone in technology, like literally. So I was doing all of that stuff, encouraging women and girls going into schools and speaking at events. And then the Gender Pay Gap Reporting Initiative was announced in 2017. And at that time, I was a director of product in a media company and in technology. And the board all were like, well, you bang on about EDI and all this stuff all the time. What the heck are we going to do? How are we going to close our gender pay gap? So I started researching it. And then I ended up fast forwarding to 3 years of geeking out later. I decided to start my business Powered by Diversity, because I got so into the research. And I saw so many different opportunities and spoke to so many individuals and companies who I felt needed what I was going to create. And so I've been doing that ever since. So yeah, went from tech to founder in tech.
I love that. I love that. All the different careers in tech, and you delivered a really great event for our corporate ambassadors as well recently, which they absolutely loved and really valued hearing your advice. I love the fact that you can't code as well, and that there are lots of free boot camps in our community if you do want to try something, because it's free, and then you can give it a go and think, maybe that wasn't for me, or you can post on the feed and say, I'm so proud that I just made it through that boot camp. Ladies, you should give it a go as well. So
Actually going to look into this.
Good. You can, for everybody listening as well, our community is community.SheCanCode.io. You can join for free and go and find yourself a free boot camp to give that a try. But ladies, we have so much to talk about today. So we're going to get started on our first question. So Danielle, let's start with you for this. For professionals starting out, what are the key steps to building a strong personal brand from scratch? What do you think?
Yeah, so good question. And it's been a long time since I started building my own personal brand. And obviously things have evolved lots since then. So it's a really good question. And I think if I was starting from scratch, the advice I would give is to think about how you want to be perceived. Think about what are you passionate about, and also what are you good at, and then start building out your brand from there. I'm pretty sure most people on this webinar would have some form of social media presence. It's always a good place to sort of start there. If you are starting from scratch and you don't have even a LinkedIn profile, I would research others that are perhaps in a similar situation to you in terms of skill set level and education level, and then just start thinking about how you want to be perceived out there in the market. Once you do have that profile, it's really important to keep seeking feedback and keep improving it. Things like connecting with other professionals in your desired field, connecting with thought leaders, things that you're interested in, and taking it back to those things that you're good at as well. We still do this now, but also attending webinars like this and then connecting with the attendees if you get access to them. I'm already wanting to speak to a lady from FDM, because I've got lots of questions for her already, and I'm sure that everyone here will be similar. Keep it relevant, make sure that you're engaging with the right topics on social media. But yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, so you have to really invest the time to see that sort of professional brand and presence grow.
Yes, and it's quite a good exercise as well. When you said they're trying to figure out what you're good at, a lot of us don't actually stop to try and actually, should I bullet point those things? And that can be quite hard to actually figure those things out.
Yeah.
Kate, I can see you nodding there about stopping to realize what you're good at. What do you agree, if you're starting out from scratch, do you have any advice? How do you start from scratch and build a personal brand?
Yeah, I was thinking about this topic earlier. Danielle, you're so right. You've got to kind of, before you launch into trying to create this perfect kind of image of you, I think you've just got to kind of almost take a step back and actually think about the really important things, like not just what are you good at, but, you know, how do you want to be perceived, and what do you believe in, and what's really important to you? Because brand, you know, it's you, isn't it? You're not selling you. It's kind of a strange way to think about it, but you are essentially selling yourself and what you've got to offer. And if you're looking for a job, you know what you've got to offer a business at the end of the day. And if you haven't quite figured that out, it's really difficult to actually put that across. But there's so much out there to help you. I think that's really important. I think you mentioned webinars like this, but you know, if you are at college or at university or even at school, I'm sure you'll find that there are these kind of workshops you can just go and get some real expert advice on, because it's easier for us because we've been around the block a little while. But when you are starting off, it can be quite intimidating to think that you've got to get out there and kind of find those opportunities for yourself, and how do you put yourself across? But there's tons of resource out there. And yeah, I would just soak it all up and just take that moment to think about how you want to come across. I don't think you can put enough time into that stage.
No, you're right. And it's putting that aside as well, that time aside. I don't think a lot of us actually take time to think, I need to put aside time for myself as well. And think, I love that you said how you want people to perceive you, because it's not always now as well, it's your next position as well. You know, if it's at work, it's your next position, and then where you would like to move. I remember years ago, somebody said to me, you don't want to dress for your role, you want to dress for the role that you want, because people immediately will think of you for that role. And it all comes under that personal brand of, where do I want to go next? How do I want people to perceive me? Whether that is in the way that you dress, or what you put out online and the content that you create online. But sometimes stopping and actually thinking about that instead of being in your day-to-day all the time. I love that, just trying to think ahead, at least one position ahead, and what that might actually look like. Cat, yourself, what do you think? Do you have any advice for building a strong personal brand from scratch?
Yes, I do, because I had a proper journey to my personal brand. So I would class myself as quite an awkward, not an awkward in that sense, but just like I prefer to be behind a laptop or in front of a spreadsheet than going out and doing like personal brand stuff, or my perception of personal brand. So I was, as we all do, just working hard and waiting to get recognized. I actually and getting quite further and further away with my authentic self, because I was on the career ladder and I had assimilated basically to get to where I was. So all of this, and I felt like all the advice, I'm a very logical minded person, and I'm a very black and white thinker. So I think my brain is like a spreadsheet, and I categorize things, and all the data that I've had in my life will go to, you know, either support or not support certain things. So I had got to a point in my life where I'm managing 32 people, and I'm a head of department, and I had never had any leadership training. And so I went on this leadership course, and it was absolutely mind-boggling. So first of all, I got 360 feedback, which I was like, oh, wow, okay, we got a ways to go here. And I'm a terrible manager and everybody hates me. No, not really. Like my team, they did not hold back, which, you know what, it was the most important thing in the world. And that experience of going on that leadership training changed my life, because until then, we all know about the likability bias that women face, but until then, I had only ever had male bosses, and I'd only ever had men telling me, you need to grow a thicker skin, you need to take a firmer line on that, you need to speak up in that meeting, you need to be thoughtful in what you believe. So I'm a female, I was a 25-year-old, you know, attractive, I had long blonde hair at the time, female, waltzing into these meetings, taking a firm line, having a thicker skin, so, you know, doing all this thing, speaking up for myself, being assertive. And my team were like, oh, wow, oh my gosh, no psychological safety. She's an autocrat. The stakeholders were terrified. They were like, don't argue with Cat, she'll be forceful, very direct, all of this thing. So I had built up this personal brand, which is nothing like my authentic self, actually, which I later found out. I went on this leadership course, and they basically were like, I was like a basket case after this. I realized all the stuff. I'm like, who am I? They basically broke us down in this first one, in this first session over a week. And we started with values. And values, I just thought to myself, do you know what? I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to give everyone that advice, because I spoke to so many people about it. When I found my core values, I was like, God, this is something that I can hang my hat. This is a place for me to start, because it was like, you know, what you're putting out there and what you've got. But when you've built up so many different, I was like a Lego person with all these different things hanging off me. And I'm like, what's real? And what do I need to just get off, put over there? And went through that process of breaking down the Lego person into all these bits, and went, this is the real me. Then they tested it in the second week. They made us go caving and all sorts of terrifying things, and made us be leaders in stressful situations, and like to test whether our values were really our values. And then in the third week, they had to build us back up again. And so all the advice that I was getting from all these people on the leadership course and the leaders were, again, this advice I'd had my whole life. You need to have more gravitas. You need to be more serious. You need to deliver with this and that. And I'm like, hang on a minute. I've just found my authenticity in the past 2 weeks. And it's not that gravitas laden person. I'm not that, you know, bitch in a suit who was walking into the boardroom and be like, you need to do this. Excuse me, I hadn't finished making my point yet. I'm doing all this stuff that all the blokes had told me to. So I had this box with a picture on who I was meant to build back up into. And I had all the wrong pieces. And I was like, okay. So thereafter went the journey. And that was a very long way of saying, if you're feeling completely overwhelmed with all the information you're getting, if you do one thing, to find your core values and work those down to the top 5, where in the most stressful situations that you've been in your life so far, those values were still present. So one of mine was sense of humor. And the person who was leading the course was like, you can't put sense of humor for one of your core values. That's ridiculous. And later on, I went through an incredibly stressful situation 5 years later, and we were joking and we were laughing about it to get through. And I was like, it bloody is one of my core values, and I knew it was all along. So find your values.
I love that. That's brilliant advice. I think you're so right. Being authentic is so important, because your team probably were quite confused as well, because you're putting all these things out, and they pick up on those vibes that you're not being authentic. So they were probably looking at you confused, thinking, I can't
Monstrous.
get you.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh, I literally went round to every single one of them. I was like, hi, nice to meet. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Cat, and you're actually going to get to know the real me now. Real eat, pray, love moment.
You do imitate as well previous bosses, and you are right. I've spoken to a few ladies who have said that to me, very senior ladies who have said, I wish someone had told me that I don't have to be my previous boss. And if my previous boss was a guy and was very and she said, you know, very sort of direct and aggressive, and you don't have to come in and do that to show your leadership style. But it's such great advice to thinking, but what are my values? What not what are my previous boss's values? What are my values? And coming off of those. Danielle, you are nodding away, like you just totally agree with everything Kat just said.
I'm thinking of leadership. I did a very similar course, and it was all around that. And also when I joined, not joined Expleo, but I took over an existing team of 15 people that had been that. And I was being sort of encouraged to be this sort of, you know, strong, directive type of boss, which isn't me. And I like to get to know people and, you know, get to know them individually, and then I'll work with them on an individual basis. And I was being sort of criticised for being that way. But I stuck with my authentic self, and in the end, it took time, but yeah, so I agree with you. Being authentic is extremely important.
Yeah, and finding your own way. Totally agree with that, and to not always feel like you have to be what your boss was like, especially I had a previous boss that wasn't great at leadership. That's the other thing, and you're looking at them thinking, is that how I was to be? You know, like, it's finding your own way.
You can take that authenticity into when we're talking about personal brand and like online presence. I remember someone once said this to me around when I was starting out, and it was around email addresses and having an email address that wasn't an inappropriate email address, because sort of years ago you would have these silly, wouldn't you, silly email addresses, and all of a sudden that email address appears on your CV, for example. So you can't have that. sexylexi@hotmail.com is the example I was given, and then it then goes on to your LinkedIn and your Instagram and your Facebook. So as someone starting out in a career and thinking about your brand, if you are applying for jobs, people in recruitment teams like myself will definitely know at Facebook profiles it has become the norm. So make sure that you don't perceive yourself as one thing on LinkedIn and then something completely different in other social profiles. And I always think of a kind of fitness guru that posts all great meals on Instagram. You know, I'm a health person. And then on his Facebook, he's in McDonald's and at a pub. That is a bit of a kind of one extreme to the other, but it's about keeping the consistency, I think.
Yes, definitely. And you're right, that those tips that you learn along the way, some of those tips as well, you implement at the time because somebody points it out to you and you go, oh my gosh, actually, that's quite embarrassing. I hadn't noticed. And then some trickle in and you learn over the course of your career what a boss might have been telling you 15, 20 years ago will suddenly sink in when you reach that position. And I've had some brilliant bosses, and I wasn't paid to say that, but you take what you need from each boss and their leadership styles. And I've been very lucky to have some great bosses, and you just take what you need from them and all the good bits. And you, as you said, you know, you find your authentic self and move forward. But some of those are really obvious at the time, like the email address. That's a really good tip. Talking of being authentic, Kate, I wanted to ask you, how can one maintain authenticity while shaping their personal brand in a competitive market? As we talked about there, it is really difficult to remain authentic and build your brand in a competitive market. So do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's understandable as well, because everything is so competitive and everyone's telling you you've got to be this particular kind of person. And in recruitment, you know, we throw around these phrases like unique selling point and what's your superpower, and then we wonder why people kind of try and pass themselves off as, you know, an expert in something or caring deeply about like the really latest trend in something that you don't actually really understand or have any massive interest in. So I think don't beat yourself up. It's really understandable that the competitive nature of finding a job or being promoted at work or whatever the situation is that you're in, it can kind of breed some of these kind of forgivable kind of behaviors. But it's just coming back, isn't it, to what we've said really from the start, that you've got to stay true to you, because that's what's going to make you memorable and that's what's going to make you of interest. And you'll get found out if you're not, and it won't work. And the worst case scenario is you don't get found out during the process, and then you're just really miserable in the role that you do find yourself in. And we've probably all had a few situations where we've felt that. So it's so important to put that time in to really think about it. And don't undersell yourself. I mean, I think again, it's this language of USPs and superpowers. That special talent you've got might feel really ordinary to you, but actually it's a really important part of who you are. So, you know, if you are the tech geek at home that everyone comes to with their problem, that is our superpower. You know, if you have got opinions and thoughts, you've got a way with words, you're really creative. They may not feel like anything major to you, but they are really essentially those unique things that are a part of you. And that's what I would really focus on.
Yes.
And like, so just stay true to you, because people will be listening and watching, and they will be interested in that. Try and take a bit of confidence, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. That's brilliant advice. And you're right. If you don't do that as well, you might find yourself miserable in a role. And it's really hard not to bring your authentic self to work, because, you know, you're always trying to be someone else. Like you said, you're always trying to say you're that expert in something or you have those superpowers, and there is a balance of not underselling yourself and not having to live up to all of those things as well. I definitely agree. Kat, I could see you smiling as Kate was talking then about, you know, even things that you were talking about earlier about the values and finding that sense of humor. Because Kate, you just said there about making sure that you're memorable to people, and Kat, having a sense of humor in those really stressful situations, that was very authentic to you and surely very memorable to your team. But it's quite difficult in those situations though, isn't it? It is a competitive market. Do you remain authentic and have a sense of humor?
This is it, right? I decided when I went into EDI and I was researching so heavily, you know, the barriers, the sheer number and size of the barriers that women, especially in tech and engineering, are having to clamber over with your skin and like fingernails coming off. There is an element of assimilation. Like, let's be honest, we have got to assimilate to get our foot in the door. Like, do whatever you need to do, authentic, not authentic, whatever you need to do to get your foot in the door. And then once you're in that career, and this is, you could tell me this is terrible advice. What are you talking about? I think that you have to develop that Sasha Fierce persona that you put on to go to interviews and to go to things that make you feel outside of your comfort zone, because you're like, the truth is, no one is going to come and tap you on the shoulder and be like, I've noticed you doing a really good job over there. I've noticed you being, you know, humble and helping the team and whatever. Like, there is, sadly, and it's sad, but you have to have an element of persona. So what I would say is, when you're going in there and you're selling yourself and it doesn't necessarily feel authentic, like if I was to be my authentic self, I'd be sat in pajama bottoms behind a laptop all day, every day, probably speaking to people on Zoom and probably never having another in-person meeting ever again. Like, let's be honest. And when I went there, I'd be late, I'd be disorganized, I wouldn't know where I was going, I'd be unprepared, and I'd make a lot of jokes. But you've got to, like, you can't be 100% unvarnished all the time. What I would say is, just always try and, so know your authentic self, know who you are at your core when you're most comfortable with your people. So this is what I'm like, this is how to get that, the real me. You know, maybe it's your family on Christmas Day or whatever, whoever it is, where you're like, this is the real me, with no makeup, no varnish, no persona, nothing. And then you're always going to put on masks and bits and pieces. You're never going to turn up, you know, in your pajamas, not knowing where to go and be half an hour late. But always be conscious of when you're putting on that layer of assimilation. Try and keep it as close as possible to the real you, and let the real you peep out as much as you possibly can. But always be conscious of when you're putting the assimilation on, because you do have to. And as soon as you get to the point where you're so confident, like you're super confident, like I am now. I'm 42 years old though. I went, like, the whole of my life I wasn't this confident. And so as soon as you get to the point where you're confident enough to take the assimilation off, maybe not to the point of pajama bottoms, but start taking it off. And talk about, you know, I used to have to assimilate. I used to have to pretend to be this sort of person, but I actually wasn't. And talk about it as loudly as you can, because the more we can all talk about the fact that, hello, we all have to pretend that we're someone we're not in order to get in the door and get the job, you know, and get to the position of management or get to the position of director or chief, whatever, on the board, before you can take off those layers and be the real you. The more that we are giving permission to the people who are coming up behind us to be like, it doesn't always have to be that way. And also, I'm in the interview and I'm going to ask you, do you really enjoy that? Because I hate it. I find it extremely boring. And surely you can't be really good at all of these things. Like, which of these things would you burn in a fire if you had to? Like, which of these things actually is not really your favorite? You know, let's start opening the door for people to be themselves more, because it's our responsibility now as a confident generation who are like, I'm owning this and I can be a bit weird. So keep your persona, be conscious of when you're putting your persona on, take it off as soon as you can.
I love that. Danielle, you were smiling along and nodding there. And I love that, like, own it and be a bit weird, but maybe don't turn up to an interview in your pajamas. But I like the fact, Kat, that you said, was picking people up in the interviews and saying, do you really enjoy what you're saying? Because you can almost tell when somebody isn't being authentic in an interview, definitely. Danielle, you were nodding along at that. It is a competitive market, but how do you find that balance?
I don't think I fully agree with Kat, I have to say.
I could tell by your face, Danielle. I love it when people disagree with me. I'm probably giving the most horrible advice in the world, so please.
I think you are a little bit. I think that everyone should go into a job with their eyes wide open, and they should give that to the person that's hiring them. And I understand that at times you have to sort of tweak who you are, but for me, I've never pretended to be someone else to get a job, to get a promotion. But then I'm naturally quite a confident person. So if I wasn't, then perhaps I would find it more difficult. But then I'm not a technical person, but then I wouldn't go for an interview that required me to be technical. So I think if you're in front of an interview panel, then you should be absolutely yourself and own it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it comes down to that person as well, because and that situation that you're in at the time, whether or not you have your own Sasha Fierce, or you feel very confident about that role and what you're going for. And I think sometimes as well, that's at different life stages, different career stages, and why you're going for that particular role. Because sometimes you might think that one is really for me, and then other times in life you think, I just really need this job because other things are going in my life, and I need something that is, you know, not as ambitious at this point, and I just need this job because it's local.
It depends on what sector you're in. So I was going into technology in the news media sector, which is very much populated by very terrifying editorial men. And so in order to be able to hold my own with those stakeholders, you know, I had a very large book thrown on my head at one point by an editor in a glass office, and luckily it ducked. I've had my contract thrown around the room. I've had people screaming, slapping the table, like going into and it depends what industry you're going into. If you're going into engineering, if you're going into finance, if you're going for, you know, a C-level position in technology in an industry where it's overpopulated by a certain type of person, it would be, you know, remiss of them to hire someone who they didn't think could hold their own in, you know, a fairly male dominated and a fairly hostile environment, I guess is the point. If you're going for a nice job in a nice company with nice people, you don't need to assimilate. Maybe you've worked for lovely companies.
It's whether you come out of that interview thinking this company isn't for me either is the other thing, whether you get that vibe and think, actually, I don't want to be in here. So yeah, it's a real balance as to what you pick at that time, and whether or not you assimilate and put on your Sasha Fierce, which I love. I think we should all come up with our own alter egos at some point that you need to put on when you do things outside of your comfort zone. Cat, I wanted to ask you, in your experience, how does having a well-established personal brand impact career opportunities, particularly in tech? Does it impact?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes, totally. So for me, like when the personal brand penny finally dropped for me, it was when someone said, it was the Maya Angelou quote. So people will forget what you said and what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. Yeah. And so what the final person who got through my thick skull about personal brand, so I was thinking, it's what you put on LinkedIn, it's your photos that you curate, it's the post that you like, it's blah. And they were like, it's what people say about you when you leave the room. And I was like, oh, that's your personal brand. Oh, okay. Yeah, fair. It was going back to that 360 feedback where what they said about me when I was outside the room was like, oh my gosh, no, don't say that. That's a terrible personal brand. Like, that's not the legacy I want to leave. And so I did a little bit of research when I knew I was going to be doing this, and I put it open on LinkedIn so you can go back and you can look at the posts and you can see what people say about me. I also did an anonymous one, but no one wanted to follow that because someone commented and they're like, if you want the real feedback, you're going to do it anonymously. I'm like, okay, I will, but I say it, good, bad, whatever. Say it on LinkedIn. Like I feel like I know pretty much every angle. And if you've got it wrong, I was hopefully assimilating when you met me. So yeah, I would say your personal brand is what people say about you when you've left the room. And what that also means is it's who recommends you. So let's be honest, the world still runs on a lot of recommendations, and much as you shouldn't do it, much as it hurts bias. And I work in diversity and inclusion. I know that I've seen the data. This is why I'm so ferocious about assimilation, because I've seen the data and people don't. But there's so many things that people do. So people go, oh, I saw on LinkedIn that you've worked with, you know, so-and-so before, you know, Kate. What do you think of her? I'm interviewing her on Tuesday. Don't do that before the meeting, because you're going to bias yourself with whatever they said about Kate. If they say she's absolutely fantastic, you're going to be going in and being like, Kate's fantastic, I can't wait to meet her. You know, if they say something else, it's always going to be in the back of your mind, and that bias really takes hold. But know that people will do that, sadly, they will. And so if you can get the Kate's amazing, she can't recommend her highly enough. Oh yeah, I've worked with Danielle, she's fantastic, she's super authentic and wonderful. It's those sorts of things, and people will, because people move around in technology all the time, and people will ask for recommendations. So make sure that they are saying things that you want them to say, and also be confident about your strengths and flaws as well, because they're probably going to talk about the things you're not that good at too. So make sure that you're ready to be like, yes, I actually do hate forms and I hate paperwork.
Yes, I love that. And yeah, when you're not in the room, so important as well in finding sponsors. Your sponsors throughout your career are those people that are saying good things about you when you are not in the room, not bad things about you when you're not in the room. Because you're right, Kat, a lot of it is done on recommendations, and if your boss is in a boardroom and a promotion comes up and they think of you and they speak kindly about you, then you're the one that's going to get the job. So yes, it definitely does impact people's careers in tech. Ladies, we're going to keep moving through these because the time is flying by. I could keep talking to you forever. Danielle, I wanted to ask you, what are some common mistakes you see professionals making when trying to build their personal brand? Oh, mistakes. What have you seen?
Well,
no.
I think we touched upon it a little bit. So that kind of inconsistency piece. So being one person in one place and being somewhere else. But whenever I think of personal brand, I always think out to the external market. But Kate has just made me think there around that internal bit. So I think, yeah, I mean, there's lots of mistakes. Another one is, well, not mistakes as such, but I think it's something that you must do, and it's like keeping that connection going. So whether it's relationships internally or whether it's new people externally, so from them events, keeping that consistency, and also not being authentic is also another. I know I'm kind of covering old ground, but when I was thinking about this, those were the points that were really sticking out. So yeah, sorry, I don't have too much more to add on that one.
No, I agree. I think consistency is so important, and that is really difficult if you're not being authentic, to remain consistent. Kate, yourself, do you think there are mistakes that people make with their personal brand?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them, isn't there? But I think I'm trying to think of something new to bring to this one, but I think it really is, if you haven't spent the time to figure it out in the first place, and if you haven't invested that time in thinking about who your audience is and the context, I guess, in which you're operating in as well. I don't think we always think about how that might. I think you're right. I really think you're right, Danielle, about that consistency. But I guess you've also got to think about the context, and that might change slightly. Well, it will change, and just kind of try, which again, it's quite complex, isn't it? You've got to really think this one through. But yeah, and I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say you're absolutely right on that, and the context and the timing, because a lot of us, especially very junior in our careers, will look at female role models and think, I need to be like that, or I'm going to base my personal brand off of that person. And that person can be so senior and so disconnected from where you are that you are making the mistake of taking on all of their things, and you're just nowhere near that position. You're not executive going to be in the boardroom, and suddenly you are trying to take on all the things they're doing for their personal brand, just at the total wrong time in your career, and it doesn't work for you. And again, it comes back to that. You're clearly not being authentic if you're trying to take on traits of a senior executive too young, which is why it's so important to have those role models at different stages of your career and throughout the tech industry as well, that there are different ladies that we can look up to at different stages, because it can be very tough as a young person to think, I have to be like that executive and I'm going to be like her when I'm a leader, and that can be a big mistake. Kate, I do want to ask you a question as well about social media. So how can one effectively showcase their personal brand on platforms like LinkedIn or other professional networks? You can make some mistakes on there as well. So how can you effectively showcase yourself on platforms like LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? And perhaps for people that don't feel, that perhaps don't have that kind of, it shouldn't have to be like a jazz hands activity. And some people just don't, like Cat, you were saying earlier, that's just not you. So I would say, first of all, let your work do the talking, because that's gonna, that's your substance. That's what you can use to illustrate what you've been claiming or your brand that you're putting out there. So let your work do the talking. And if you've put plenty of time into thinking about how you can showcase that, whether it's on a website or it's a blog or it's an online portfolio, I think that will really help. Perhaps you feel a bit more comfortable about actually just getting out there and showing what you can do, because your work will speak for you. But I guess it's also about kind of showcasing your thoughts and your opinions and the knowledge that you've got. And again, it's not about passing yourself off as some kind of influencer, if that makes you really cringe. That's not for everyone. But like I said, if you're getting involved and you're engaged on different platforms, and you're getting involved in the debate and the conversation, that will showcase your brand as much as anything. And again, it will get your thoughts and your opinions, and it doesn't always have to be LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is the obvious one. It's huge, it's global. What is it, 600 million users all over the world? It's huge, but that might feel a bit too global and a bit too impersonal and too broad. So there's lots of other platforms out there that just might be better for you, whether it's, I don't know, Slack or even if it's Instagram or, whatever it is that you can feel kind of comfortable in. And it's a platform where you can engage with like-minded people and grow that network that we know is so important. So I think it is important, but it doesn't have to be about being the loudest person on social media. In fact, that can be a bit dangerous as well, actually. So yeah, find your niche. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see a question in here from somebody that said they're just starting out in my career and they don't have a lot of accomplishments. So do you have tips on building a strong personal brand if you don't have a lot to showcase? And actually what you just said there, if you're just starting out and you're even liking and sharing and trying to get involved in the debate and the conversation, that's an easy way to start showing your work and what you're doing if you are incredibly new and you don't have much to try and even show off at that point. Just get involved in the discussion. I completely agree with that. Kat, I want to ask you one question before we go to the Q&A quickly. But what strategies do you recommend for evolving or rebranding yourself as your career or goals change? They do change. So but how do you rebrand as you go?
They certainly do. I would say always be open to keep those core values as your core values. Sometimes your core values can change, but often, mostly it's more like this one's coming up here and this one's a bit lower here. Always keep as my fellow panelists said at the beginning, keep that list of my strengths and my flaws. And the more that you can, because when you're just starting out, and when I started out, I was terrible at saying my strengths, and this is the whole imposter syndrome thing of like, oh no, I'm not good at that. And don't tell me, say 5 things that you're good at. I could say 5 things that I'm good at right now, no problem. But rewind 20 years, and I would have been like, oh no, don't look big-headed or arrogant or whatever. But no, and focus on those strengths and make them Olympian. So as your brand evolves, get those strengths and build them, hone them until you are literally amazing. It's a huge spike of skill. Like, I am brilliant creative problem solver. Give me anything. That's my headline. That's my H1 of my personal brand. I'm a creative problem solver. I love it. I never met a problem I didn't want to solve. But on the other side of that, and know that on the flip side of every strength, there is going to be a flaw. So my flaw on the other side is put me in operating with no problems to solve, just steering a steady ship, and I will literally evaporate from boredom. I won't be able to do it. So if you are focusing on your flaws all the time, just look on the other side. This is a way to find your strength. Look at your flaws, flip it over, and there'll be a strength on the other side. So, and Google it. If you're like, oh, I'm really bad at such and such, people who are bad at such and such are generally really good at whatever that is. Find your strengths and always keep evolving yourselves with those strengths in mind. Forget about the flaws. Round those off. You're probably never going to change them. Just round them off and focus on the spiky strengths.
Focus on the good things. Someone in here did say that they loved your point when you were talking about being authentic. They worry themselves about striking a balance between a strong personal brand and staying true to who you really are. And I love what you just said there about almost being ready as well. When somebody says, what are your strengths and what do you do? A lady in the past, it stayed with me and it was so with me forever. She said to me, I don't say I'm in sales. I just say I find the shortest route to the money. And that is what she is good at. And she says, I find the shortest route to the money. And it stayed with me because it was just so, she just knows what she's really good at. And if you are uncomfortable saying what you're good at, I love the fact that you're just like, well, then figure that out. So it rolls off the tongue when somebody does ask you.
Yeah, you've got to.
But be prepared. Also in here, somebody has said, totally agree, but I'm trying my hardest to be authentic to myself, but I work in a very male-dominated company and I'm finding it hard to be taken seriously when I don't emulate the same leadership styles. Do you have any advice on that?
Danielle, you did a you did a I want to hear what you're going to say about this, Danielle, because we're probably going to say the opposite.
Because you'll say change and meet their ways, whereas I'm like battle with them and get them to see that you can be just as such a strong leader without being and behaving the way they do. Go Cat, say the opposite.
Yes. No, don't feel bad. This is you being authentic. And my whole ethos is diversity. Every opinion has merit. There'll be people who resonate so hard with what you're saying. They're like, God, I'd never speak to that cat. And people who are like, she's all right. So what I would say is, I would say the same thing. However, what I would caveat that with is that's very easy advice to give when you're feeling really confident. If you go back and remember what you were like when you were starting out and you were feeling really unconfident, maybe you never have, but I just remember thinking, do you know what? I need some armor here. I need some armor. And I'm just gonna, and when you're not in the moment, like I pitch now and I'm a founder. And so I'm pitching to men. The people who get the money are men. The people who give the money are men. There's men everywhere. And so I find it really hard to pitch as my authentic self, which is where I have a major conflict, because now I'm totally authentic all the time in everything I do. But you still have to put on that persona. So I'd say, and I'm fighting a losing battle, because if I don't go in there like a founder man from Silicon Valley, I ain't going to get the cash. And I haven't. I've raised twice, but through different methods. But going into one of those pitch processes as me, it's hard. And when you look at the amount of money that women get, when you look at the positions that women get in organizations, the data speaks for itself. So I would say, yes, when you're confident enough, go into battle. Absolutely. There's more than one way to lead, and women leaders are fantastic and they're amazing. And I would love to work for whoever asked that question. However, I would say there is definitely an element of play the game wisely, but be ready to drop that assimilation and that persona that you have to put on in order to get to that position as soon as you feel confident enough to do so.
Yeah. We are almost out of time. I wanted to quickly pick your brains on one last thing. There's a couple of questions in here asking about personal brand and company brand. There's somebody asking about, they run their own business. So if you have any advice for differentiating your own personal brand from your company's brand, and whether you should do that. But there's also somebody in here asking about they've been in their job for a while. They've also said, thank you so much, ladies. This session has been super helpful. And they wanted to ask you, they've been at the same company for several years. I'm worried my brand has become too closely tied to this company. Any tips on how I could create a more independent personal brand? Any tips there? Do you become your company's brand? Like, any tips on that? Especially if you're working for a company that suddenly you feel their values don't align with you? How do you address that?
Blimey, that's a big question. We need another hour for this one, Kaylee.
Well, I'll throw that one in before we end,
Yeah.
just as the final
You
thoughts.
just drop that bomb. I mean, it is a tough one, that, isn't it? And I mean, companies grow and change, or they should do, just in the way that we grow and change. So I guess you've got to really navigate some of that and keep checking in on your own values and making sure that you're still aligned. And so I think, yeah, I need to think about that one, really, because I think it's quite a tough question.
I'm happy to
Cat,
weigh in
go
and be
for it.
opinionated. You know, my relevant opinion, I just figure I'm here, I'm on a panel, so I might as well give out all the advice I've possibly got. So I think it's great if your company's values align with your own, as long as you had your values first and you didn't just take on your company's values. I've worked at organizations where I felt a strong, brand alignment, or I felt really proud, actually. And think about whether you feel proud to work for the brand and whether that is in some way clouding your vision towards, because I'm so proud to work here, I feel like we share the same values, and you almost take those on as your own. But there will be some where you're like, no, I'm not sure about that. But if it is a total values alignment, if your values are fearlessness, trust, respect, and they are the values of the organization, there's no need to differentiate yourself. I think in terms of if you started your own business, it's the most natural. It would be weird if the brand values of that business were not your own core values, which I've got a business, and what do you know? The values of my organization are the same as my own ones, because it has to come from the heart. It has to be a purpose-based brand. But there are areas where our personalities will differ. So where Powered by Diversity would behave a certain way and put across a certain thing online, for example, I was going to use a terrible example then. I was going to say we don't shame people on that, which we never do. But I also don't shame people. That was a terrible example. But where I'm not afraid to weigh in on an argument and go in there and be like, I've got a point of view on this, I'm going to put it across. Whereas Powered by Diversity would be a little bit more, let's just stand back, let's look at the activists and have this debate, and we will come and educate people when they come to us or when they're ready for that education piece. So we do differ in our personalities, but not our values.
Yeah, that's good advice. When you know the audience you're talking to, and I agree, if you suddenly find yourself at a company, as that company is growing as well, and as they evolve, if you are no longer aligned with their values and their values have changed over that time period, it might be time to exit if they don't align with you and your own personal brand. Ladies, I could keep going through questions, and we could keep talking for another 2 hours on this topic. It's been an absolute pleasure. So Cat, Kate and Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today on our Power Up webinar series. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for everybody watching. Thank you so much, as always, for dialing in live and watching us. There will be a recording available from tomorrow as well. If you missed us live and you want to tell somebody that didn't catch us live to join us, and you can rewatch it on SheCanCode's blog. As we mentioned earlier, if you would like to join our community, we'd absolutely love to see you in there sharing your advice with other ladies. There is a new mentoring program that launched recently as well, so please do take a look at that. It is free, and you can join us at community.shecancode.io to find a mentor, a mentee, and lots of other free boot camps and offers in there as well, and lots of other ladies like yourselves. So thank you as always for joining in, and an absolute pleasure to chat with you all, ladies. So thank you so much. We will hopefully see you all again next time, listeners. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.